Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding and another episode of my road to the 2025 Arnold Classic series. Today is more of a review episode. I love how at this particular Arnold we have a lot of great rival storylines going into the show. We basically have 2 or 3 shows wrapped up into one. This is what happens when you have 3 Olympia champions, a 212 Olympia champion, and 3 Arnold Classic winners all on the competitor list. Brandon Curry and William Bonac are standard rivals at this point, and reading the writing on the wall, this could very well be their last Arnold Classic. But they do share a long history together. They both have 2 Arnold Classic Ohio titles, and they have beaten each other before and vice versa. However, the last time they stepped on stage was at the 2024 Mr. Olympia, and William finally beat Brandon once again, something that had not happened since 2018. So sure, while we're just going to review those versions from the 2024 Mr. Olympia, I find this to be one of the more important matchups for predictions. I think these two have gone back and forth for many reasons, including the fact that they're incredible bodybuilders. Can Brandon catch up and place ahead of Bonac and potentially their last Arnold Classic, or will Bonac ride off into the sunset on top? Let's just see how close it was at the 2024 Mr. Olympia to see if we can get any clues for one of the main matchups for the 2025 Arnold Classic. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more of my Road to the Arnold Classic series. Now, this is a review episode, so we're going to go pretty quickly through this one. And we've seen these guys compete dozens of times, often placing very close together. And this comparison also isn't the most positive one. Unfortunately, a lot of this comparison is just going to come down to who retains more of their prime look. There's no shame in that, but it's the name of the game between these two. Now, because there are a lot of issues plaguing both guys, a lot of these poses will be close even when someone wins, because they'll be winning with a very flawed pose. Anyway, here in the first shot, I think Brandon has more of his OG charm. He's definitely not as full and as powerful looking as he once was. The main thing going for him now is the shape, because Bonac's has only gotten worse. Bonac definitely has the better condition between the two, and on that alone, he has the better legs because of it. But like I said, it's tit for tat because Bonac's legs are really muddled looking, but Brandon straight up looks like he's still in the off season. His whole physique does. Bonac honestly has pretty good arms too. He has a little imbalance, but Brandon sure isn't innocent either. What wins Brandon the pose though is the torso. He has a much smaller waist than Bonac and the better lats, leading to an obvious win in overall shape. Bonac perhaps wins more of the actual substance, like the different body parts individually and conditioning, but he's missing the one thing Brandon actually still does well, having good shape. So Brandon is going to take our first pose, but very, very narrowly. He's very smooth and really doesn't appeal to me in general anymore, but still he does more so than Bonac. It's pretty much the same deal here in the front lat spread. Bonac has way better conditioning once again. He's winning the lower half on detail alone, but he is also bigger. And up top, he has the better arms and delts. Brandon does get him in the chest though for sure. Bonac's is practically shriveled away in this pose. Of course, we have to talk about the lats too. Brandon used to get Bonac here easily, and he still wins, but this is nowhere near close to being a resounding win. But with that smaller waist, wider shoulders, that shape once again pulls enough weight for Brandon, at least for me. With his subpar condition and lats not really being a major win, I could easily see a good chunk of fans picking Bonac on this one. This brings me to my judging system. I use a margin of victory point system where the winner gets 1, 2, or 3 points depending on how big the win is. I don't think most of these poses are even capable of being 3-point wins because they're both very flawed, and these first 2 shots definitely aren't solid for Curry. Because he leaves the door open in conditioning and other aspects, both of these shots are going to be as narrow as possible since they could go either way. So Brandon is just going to receive 1 point in the front double and the front lat spread. There used to be some epic battles in the side chest between these two gentlemen, and really it's still very competitive to this day, but these guys are operating at a lower capacity than they once were. This pose, I guess maybe this entire comparison really, boils down to size versus detail. Brandon still looks pretty massive. I would say he was able to retain a lot more of his 3D effect than Bonac did. However, that did come at the cost of conditioning for Brandon. Bonac looks a little more deflated compared to his own prime, but if anything, he's only gotten more detailed now, especially since that muscle maturity has set in. Bonac probably wins the side leg. I say probably because although he makes Brandon look very smooth, Brandon is still bigger and more balanced. Bonac has very underwhelming hamstrings and overpowering glutes. When we shift our gaze up, Brandon does get a small win in the midsection for what it's worth, not much. Brandon also wins the arm and delt too. Bonac has that insane bicep peak, but Brandon's bicep and his entire arm is just so thick and full. It's the same in the delt. And finally in the pecs, just solely pecs to pecs, I would actually give this to Bonac. If you isolate the chest, I think you'll find that Bonac isn't much smaller smaller, if at all, next to Brandon, but Bonac has a distinct detail advantage which puts him ahead. But this is going to be one of those rarer cases where I break away from the mentality of so goes the pecs, so goes the pose. Bonac's win is not resounding in the chest, nor the side leg, and Brandon to me is overall the more impressive guy because he's bigger. To me, that's what the shot is all about. That's what comes first, thickness from the side. It's a pretty close pose though because they're both good in different ways. It kind of reminds me of the Impro Classic earlier last year, where I had Beirut Tabani winning the side chest against Bonac, but Tyler Mannion, who was there, actually gave it to Bonac. And Tyler's argument was Bonac's detail, and the same can be applied here, but I'm not about to do that. Instead, I'm giving Brandon a 1-point win in our first side pose. But let's shift to the back poses now. Those first shots are all favorable to Brandon, but this is where the rubber meets the road. These guys, for a brief period in time, were the best two in the world in the rear double. They've both been surpassed now, that's the natural order of things, but you can tell Bonac is Bonac. Brandon looks like a completely different person, and that is not a good thing. The lower body is rough. Brandon has no ass, and he's practically walking on stilts. Bonac is bigger and more complete calves to glutes, and certainly more shredded. I suppose the back gets slightly closer, but that really isn't saying much considering what a blowout the lower half is. Brandon is still okay through the upper back. He has the big traps and he's fairly wide, but the lats and lower back are just so unimpressive now. Regressing in terms of muscle mass and having bad condition are a recipe for a disaster in this shot. Even Brandon's once detailed and monstrous delts are lackluster at this point. Bonac, once again, is overall more complete as he hangs on to more of his prime look. He has the more detailed back by a long shot, and that same detail advantage even wins him the arms and delts. I was looking for reasons not to make this a 3-point win for Bonac, and I guess the upper back for Brandon is a good one, but after asking my chief offshore advisor, I decided to just go with 2 points for Bonac. Let's show a little respect, I guess. The rear lat spread is a bit closer than the last shot, and that's mainly because of the backs. William is still sweeping the lower half. I don't think we need a replay of that train wreck. But up top, William looks, I don't know, a little wonky, I guess. He had a lat tear, and I could tell in the last pose, but it is definitely more evident here. That's why he leans way back in this shot. He's trying to even out the lats and hide the lower back. But he still beats Brandon despite that. Brandon did not open up at the Olympia very well at all. So Bonac appears to be the same width as him, if not wider. Brandon really only has the traps going for him, but the overall margin in their backs between him and Bonac is a little bit closer. Close enough to limit the margin? No, I don't think so. Bonac is still winning up top, and the lower half is a slam dunk. So I'm going to make the second back pose another 2-pointer as well. The side tricep showcases two pretty different poses, kind of like the side chest. I would say Brandon is winning the side leg now. With Bonac's execution, his side leg flattens out and loses that detail that allowed him to win in the side chest. The midsection is probably once again going to Brandon too. Bonac is more locked in, but the abs are just too messy. The pecs also go to Brandon. They retain much more fullness in the shot compared to Bonac's, who's flattened out like a side leg did. The namesake of the pose, however, the side try, is going to Bonac. Not by much, these guys have similar shape to their horseshoes, and with this angle it's hard to tell, but Bonac does look bigger. Overall, I do prefer Brandon's presentation and the level of size. He's more impressive than Bonac, and I think with Brandon's execution and the tight waist, he looks more aesthetic as well. Can it be anything more than 1 point though? No, yet again, I don't think that's the move here. Bonac is very solid. I'm pretty much deciding this one on personal preference, which dictates that this remains close. Now you'd think there's absolutely no chance for William to win in the abs and thighs pose. For one, he's not hitting it head on. If he did, it would be a disaster, but regardless, his abs just aren't that good. Historically, he never beat Brandon in the shot. But there is nothing going on in Brandon's pose. He might win the legs, but that's just because Bonac isn't flexing his properly. Curry's legs are way too small and devoid of any detail. But still, somehow he is showing more than Bonac, I guess? But then the abs are flipped. You are forced to go with Bonac. Curry has the small waist, but that's it. His abdomen showcases only disappointment. He has literally almost zero ab definition. Bonac should not be winning this clearly in the abs ever, but he is with superior obliques and even better abs. We are left with a bit of a puzzle though. It's a split pose. Bonac wins the abs, and I guess you can call what Curry does in the legs a win, but I consider the abs to be more important in this shot. But let's be honest, no one is winning this shot. This is a nothing burger of a pose. Who cares who gets this point, really? I'm giving it to Bonac because he's less of a loser, but with that said, I don't really care anyway. We're moving on. We're going to look at two variations for this last pose, and unfortunately the best I can do for the hands clasped one was a screenshot from the video I'm going to show you in a little bit, but I think it's fine. Anyway, let's get into the pose, and yikes, look at Brandon's legs. This is the smallest I've seen them since his younger years before he peaked. They're extremely small, and he has the conditioning of a water buffalo. I don't think I need to tell you that Bonac utterly embarrasses Curry in the lower body. As we move up, Brandon does technically win the midsection, but that's because Bonac is just so poor. Brandon's waist is just smaller than Bonac, and Bonac's head-on abs are just way too messy. Honestly, Bonac's wide waist, narrow shoulders combo does kind of make the entire pose look a little funky, so I will say Brandon is more appealing in that aspect. He has the better shape, but come on, this is the most muscular, and it's not about that. Bonac is bringing a ton more actual substance to the table. He swept the legs and pretty much does the same in the upper half. Brandon isn't just losing for the lack of size on top, it's honestly more so the lack of quality. He has very thick arms, but Bonac's are just as impressive in the shot, and his are more separated, and the same goes for the delts and the chest. Next we have the crab, and both guys do get better here, but Brandon benefits more actually. The legs are largely out of the equation in this shot. Bonac does win, but they're not the focus here, so it's not worth as much as his win was in the last pose. But the midsections are also out of the equation, and that's more of a benefit to William, so they both get to downplay their major weakness here for starters. Through the upper half, Brandon showcases more of that thick muscle, and he manages to wring out a little more detail than the last shot. But Bonac still has this incredible 3D effect to help against the thickness of Curry. What seals the deal though is that superb level of detail. It's the most impressive thing up here between these two. Not even the actual muscle mass between these guys, it's all that detail from the Conqueror. With that said, I do think Brandon still has a shot here. I wouldn't give him the pose personally, but this is closer than the last shot. He's thicker and can bring okay details here. But that first variation was 2 points, bordering on a 3-point win for Bonac. So when we take the average, I'm pretty comfortable giving Bonac 2 points overall in the final pose of this comparison. Next, we have the overall physique categories. This section of judging is about judging the whole physiques on 4 metrics, being shape, conditioning, flaws, and muscularity. I'm going to start with the obvious ones and make them both the biggest margins. The first one is condition. Bonac's condition on its own is great, sure, but what convinced me to do the full 3 points here was actually Brandon's condition. It's the gap between these two. You have Bonac, who is peeled everywhere, and you have Brandon that looks like he's in the offseason. Not only was he never that conditioned to begin with ever, he lost a lot of the details he once had. But in shape, he's going to get a 3-point win to counteract Bonac's previous win. I think that's also the pretty obvious choice here. Bonac's shape is just not good. Now let's go to muscularity for more of an interesting category, one I actually went back and forth on before the final draft was set. Brandon is bigger, fuller, he retains more of that prime look in terms of overall muscularity. Until you get to the legs. They are by far the worst they've ever been since he actually became a name. And they're a big stain on his overall presence in this category because they're just so weak back to front. With that horrible drop off in the lower body, William is definitely the more complete one. Not to mention his back is definitely a lot better at this point too, and that just adds to his completeness. For Brandon, you just can't leave your legs at home and expect to win here. Bonac, although he is smaller, he doesn't have a gap at all really, let alone a big one like Brandon's legs. Brandon is still bigger everywhere else from the waist up, and that's almost why I had him winning the category, but as I worked through this, I realized that's just not right. Bonac is bigger in the legs, that's half the body. He's bigger and better in the back, and everything else on him is still good, even Brandon's strong points like the chest, delts, and arms. I actually had Brandon winning 1 point for just the sheer size in my first draft, but now I have him losing this category to Bonac pretty easily. I'm giving Bonac 2 points here. And that leaves us with flaws. While Brandon has significant gaps, they've already been counted, and I don't double up on things that have been counted and fit into other categories. Other than that, I don't think Brandon has too many flaws besides maybe that big ass head. Bonac really does have some issues though, the abs, the minor lat tear, and I think he shows just more of his overall wear and tear in his physique, unfortunately. They do both share that problem though of just looking beat up, so while I'm giving Brandon the win, he's just going to get 1 point. That brings us to the end of this comparison, and yes, I do not disagree with the results from the 2024 Mr. Olympia. Bonac does kind of look beat to hell, but he's still pulling together pretty good physiques. Physiques that win and should win. He's more complete for sure, Brandon has gaps, and where he has them, it's not just a gap, it's a full-on chasm. He's missing too much back and way too much legs, and his condition was just plain bad. And honestly, I find that a lot of the times in the lower placings where both guys are flawed, judges tend to err on the side of whoever's in the better condition. This goes for amateur shows, all the way up to the Olympia. This is probably because it's the most subjective category in bodybuilding. And I'm certainly thinking in the same way. Both guys have gaps and or issues, but Bonac brings more substance. And part of that is condition, but of course he's just actually more well-rounded. Now in these videos, I not only give you the winner of the comparison, of course, but I tell you my current prediction for the Arnold. Going into the contest, Brandon does have ground to make up, but it's not totally unrecoverable. Their scores were separated by 20 points, and that's just where it starts to be conclusive. I think if Brandon can close the gap on condition, then maybe the judges will favor his shape and go for him over Bonac, but that's a stretch. Brandon is probably going to lose size chasing condition. There are like 3.5 months between the Olympia and the Arnold, and at 40 years old, I doubt Brandon grows into shows anymore. The recent updates seem to back up what I'm saying too. Brandon looks to actually be playing the conditioning game, and that's great, that's what I said he needs to do. He looks peeled by his own standards, but he seems to be smaller than even his latest Olympia package. I get why he's playing the conditioning card, because it's really the only one he has left. The shape card is already being played, and now he can't play the size card either. But keep in mind, his condition card isn't even PSA 10. All of this to say, I'm not too confident in Brandon in context nor based on recent updates. He's got his hands full and he needs to rejuvenate his entire physique. Bonac, on the other hand, actually seems to be doing both things. He's gaining a little size and life to areas of his physique like the legs, but he's retaining that condition. He doesn't even really need to improve, he just needs to hold on. But he's going above and beyond to do his very best. And as he did in this comparison, I believe William Bonac will be coming out on top at the Arnold Classic against Brandon Curry in about half of the lineup. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. What did you guys think of this comparison, and who are you predicting to place higher at this year's Arnold Classic? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video and want to stay up to date on the series, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you want to support my channel even further, be sure to head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, use my code PROJECT10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code PROJECT10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexia.